What your money would say. Andrew McNair. Money Talks. Are you listening? Money Talks. Are you listening? Money Talks. Are you listening? What your money would say with Andrew McNair.
Welcome to What Your Money Would Say. I'm your host, Andrew McNair.
And I'm your co-host, Scott Malleck.
And on What Your Money Would Say, we like to take financial ugly ducklings and turn them into financial swans. But what does it mean to be a financial swan? It means to sleep well at night. And that's why I started my wealth management firm, SWAN Capital, because I believe families deserve to sleep well at night.
And I had a similar motivation starting my law practice, the law offices of Scott Malleck. I practice my practice to help my clients do timely planning for untimely events.
And one of those untimely events, Scott, is divorce. We know it affects so many millions of families, either personally or someone we know. And so that's why I think it's important that we talk about how to deal with divorce. So on today's show, we're going to talk about the 7 financial pitfalls that families need to avoid while going through divorce, as well as 5 keys to helping you thrive after divorce. This became apparent to me that this would be a great and a good show because I had 2 families come in 1 week's time, had some really very tough financial decisions to make about their divorce. They had to look at settlement offers. They had to do pension evaluations. But unfortunately, there wasn't enough tools or answers I could give to them at that time. So that's why I sought after a special designation called the CDFA, a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, to aid families that are going through divorce make those tough financial decisions. So, Scott, let's jump into it.
So obviously with divorce, it can be an extremely emotional time. I mean, obviously you can either be hurt or feel cheated or anything like that. So, we're talking about pitfalls. So what is the best way that you handle emotion and divorce when you're going through a divorce settlement?
Well, I think the first pitfall is failure to cut emotional ties from the divorce negotiations. So when we have an offer that comes to the table and it's giving up one's home or selling one's home, a lot of emotion comes, which is natural because the last thing you want to do is that's where y'all moved in together, that's where you raised your children together, and now someone's telling you to sell this home or that you need to split the proceeds, and that can be devastating emotionally, but it may or may not be the right financial decision. And unless you have a third party like a CDFA, like a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, that helps everyone take a step back and says, well, financially, does this make sense? It can be very tough, Scott.
Because I know that there's a lot of times that we place in, emotional value, as you were suggesting, with, certain assets like the home. So what is the best way to separate that? Like, I know you kind of mentioned, is there any advice that you can give families?
Sure. Well, I think things are priceless, Scott. There's a reason why we say that doesn't have a price. And I think what families have to do before they even go into the divorce is let's set some priorities. These are non-negotiables. These are some things I want. I either came into the divorce or I got after the divorce, and I don't want to, separate from that. So at all costs, I want that. But you got to understand, when you say at all costs to keep this, that you're going to have to give up some and sacrifice some other things.
That's a good point. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about that. So you have to weigh, going into a settlement like that, you have to weigh, what you do value, even if it is, have emotional ties, so what you're willing to give up in order to get that. So obviously, divorce also can create lots of changes in your familial status, and it can also create changes in income. So what should I do to plan for a change in the income that's coming into my household, and how do I address that change accordingly?
Well, and that's the second pitfall we see is families not having a pre and post spending plan. And the statistics show that when a family splits up, these now 2 single individuals their discretionary income is actually going down. And that's because of economies of scale. If we're all sharing that 1 gallon of milk, for example, we all don't have to buy the same gallon individually and double our cost. And so I think we have to first start off with what is our lifestyle today? And a lot of people say, well, let's get a budget together. And a budget's scare people. Hand someone a white piece of paper, blank, and say, hey, can you write down everywhere you spend your money? It's overwhelming. But I like to use the word spending plan. So first off, you have to start with a pre-spending plan. What is my lifestyle today? What am I trying to protect? What am I trying to mirror after the divorce? Of course, there's going to be some things that are definitely going to have to come down. You might not have to be able to live initially as extravagantly as you did before. And then the next is you have to create a post-spending plan, which means what is it going to look like at the end of the light at the end of the tunnel? What is our lifestyle going to look once I'm single? And you can only do that with creating a pre and post spending plan.
So basically you're advocating that when somebody's going through a divorce proceeding, that they should understand that, their income has changed dramatically, because obviously, if you were both working, even if you're the average income of the United States and you cut that in half, that's a dramatic difference.
Certainly.
And so going into a divorce settlement, you have to understand that you have to make sure that you're purchasing accordingly, and then afterwards, going forward through the future, what you have and what you're going to have from a settlement.
It's back to those priorities we talked about in the first pitfall, is setting the priorities. Water, yeah, that's important. Electricity, those things are some non-negotiables. But, is that car that we've been driving, the Mercedes, can we go down to a Toyota? These are some tough calls that you have to make, unfortunately, when we're facing a divorce.
Toyota might take a little...
again, they might take, but that's a great car. I have one.
Of course.
So let's jump to the third one, which is more your avenue as an estate planning attorney. What about forgetting those old estate planning documents?
And see, this is an important thing, is making sure that your legal documents reflect the current situation that you're in is imperative. I have families that come in that aren't going through divorce, that have, it's been 30 years. So, they created a will 30 years ago or a power of attorney 30 years ago, and it's been sitting on the desk collecting dust.
Sure.
And lots of things have changed in 30 years.
Yes.
And the same thing goes for, when you go through a divorce. Florida does provide some protection for the people that go through divorce in regards to the ex-spouses, but I always say it's better to make sure that your estate planning documents, your life insurance policies, your 401k beneficiaries, your pay on death accounts, all of those things reflect your current situation, and you'd rather make those changes and those updates rather than rely on whether or not those protections are going to kick in.
Yes, you always want to be proactive.
Exactly.
In a situation like this, and it's so true. When families bring in their estate plan documents, we look at the millimeters of dust on top of them. Every 3 to 5 years is a good rule of thumb of updating your documents. But when life events like death, dismemberment, disability, someone having Alzheimer's, the second is a divorce. When some of these large life events are a great time to say, hey, let's look at these documents. Let's go visit Scott Malleck and see if we need to update these documents. And you offer a free consultation.
I do. My first consultation is always free. I always look at, I always encourage you to bring your documents in, and I will review them for you for free. Basically, the ones that are most important that you have updated to reflect that are your will, your power of attorney, your living will, because those are three of the most important things that you can have. I mean, if you have trust, if you have things like that, those are things that we can talk about updating, but they don't necessarily need to be, they're not as imperative as basically your power of attorney, your will.
Sure.
Because you have personal representatives in there, people with power of attorney have authority to act on your behalf. So those are all really important documents to get updated to make sure that they're reflecting your current situation.
Yes, because the last thing you want is your doctor chasing after the person that's stated in your living will to pull or not pull the plug, and they find out it's the ex-spouse, then they're saying, oh my gosh, we've wasted our time searching for this person, and then we have to go search for someone else.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to make sure, like I keep saying, that your legal documents do reflect your situation, because you want, in the situation that they're needed, you want them to be able to be used as adequately and efficiently as possible.
So if you're just tuning into What Your Money Would Say, I'm your host, Andrew McNair.
And I'm your co-host, Scott Malleck.
And we're dealing with divorce. There's 7 major financial pitfalls that we see every day in our office, as well as 5 keys that we know that can help you thrive after divorce. Now, if you have any question, remember the show is live, and you can call us at 478-3116. That's 478-3116. But if you just want to get that free consultation about updating your estate planning documents, Scott, share your number with them.
Well, my office phone number is 850-403-0351. Again, that's 850-403-0351. Or you can go online, and there's a place on my website that you can request a meeting and a consultation. And that website's Pensacola, as in the city, Elder, ELDER, attorney.com.
That's pretty easy.
I try to make it as simple as possible. It's a long one, but it's still pretty easy.
It's easy. Now, if you're saying, well, Andrew, this is really interesting. I never thought that I could hire a financial professional that specializes in divorce, aid me through this tough divorce process. That's what a certified divorce financial analyst, what I do for a living, is aid families going through divorce. And again, my free consultation is a 1-hour meeting to see how we can set expectations and make sure that you walk out of the divorce as strong and financially independent as what you hope to. And you can call our office at 850-380-9558. That's 850-380-9558. Or visit us at swan-capital.com. So let's jump to the next one.
So typically, a lot of people are thinking about the assets, the accounts, the divorce, and the whole procedure of divorce. So what do I need to be thinking about with regards to taxes when it comes to tax time with regards to divorce?
And that's the fourth pitfall that we see is families are neglecting the tax effects of their divorce. There's 3 main points I want to talk about with taxes. The first one is just think about the basic of how do you file next year. Depending on when you got divorced, that's important on when you're going to file. There's multiple different ways to file, such as married filing separately. Is that a good idea or is it not? It's one of the sometimes least efficient ways to file, but a lot of families don't know that. Married filing jointly is one option. Some families just stick it out just so they can file that way because it is tax efficient. Then you have single. Then we have head of household if you're caring for dependents. In making these tough decisions on how to file, it's really powerful when we can sit down with that family's CPA that may or may not specialize in divorce and share with them our insights, and we get together and say, hey, what's the best way to file for this family?
And the reality is depending on what you select and the way that you file, there are different deductions and different tax advantages to those filings. So it is really, really important to think about how you're going to file.
Absolutely.
Because like you said, you mentioned, filing single is, you're going to not have nearly as many deductions as you file married.
And if you don't have a dependent, that could be your only
Exactly.
choice. But you need to know what options you do have. The second is thinking about the tax net effect of your assets. So many times we'll say, well, this money market has $200,000, but the 401k has $400,000. Well, I'd rather get the larger amount, the $400,000, but they don't think about the tax effect of a 401k. I ask families, do you think tax rates are going higher or lower? Well, that may or may how you answer affect what asset we choose. Do you want to pick an asset that's already been taxed or an asset that we don't know what the tax rates are going to be in 10, 20 years when you pull it out? So those are the things that the aha moments, the light bulbs that turn on when we're meeting with families and asking them these tough decisions like, what do you think about taxes? That can help them get some clarity about if this settlement offer that they're given makes sense for their individual situation.
So you kind of hinted at, 401ks, IRAs. So what should I be thinking about with regards to divorce and how it might affect my retirement accounts?
Well, and that's a great transition because there's a lot of abilities to do some really great things with 401ks. But one last thing I want to, before I forget about taxes, there are ways you can deduct some of your divorce expenses on your next year's tax return. But you got to keep great records. You got to itemize these records. You got to keep good memos on them. And so there's a way where you can consult with your CPA and share with them that you went through a divorce and here are your divorce expenses and see how much you can write off because that'll save you some money at tax time. So let's jump into number 5, which has to do with the distributions of a 401k, TSP, these qualified plans. Qualified plans, Scott, for people that don't know, are plans that have never been taxed. So if I work at a company, maybe I get a match, maybe I don't, but I put $1 into this. Well, my dollar has never been taxed because it's pre-tax contributions. And so when we're getting closer to retirement and we're facing a divorce, there's sometimes a gap in employment or a gap before retirement, and we need to access these 401ks. But unfortunately, Scott, as you know, there's a 59.5 rule, which means if you take out money pre-59.5, you could face a 10% penalty on top of the taxes owed.
You mean that I can't take the money when I want, even though it's my money?
Yes, the IRS came up with 401k, so they make all the rules, I guess. But there are really neat ways if you're going through a divorce, and the rules are very, they're not easy to understand, and they're easy to make a pitfall.
Trust me, I remember taking income taxation in law school, and the tax code was, 12 inches thick. It seemed like, and I can only imagine that. I don't claim to be a tax expert, but and I knew my way around taxes, but I know it can be complicated. So you definitely need to consult people that understand and have an idea about the tax implications of specific actions. And
as a CDFA, a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, we work with CPAs to make sure that you're taking full advantage of the 72T2C tax code.
So that was a 72T2C.
Say that 3 times fast, right, Scott? So basically, that's a tax code that allows us to take a percentage out of the 401k before it's rolled over to a separate account, which is really huge because they can avoid that tax penalty. Of course, they still have to pay the taxes because there's no way to avoid taxes unless you want to wear striped pajamas.
I know. I always laugh when clients come in and say, well, I don't want to pay any taxes. And I say, well, then you're going to go to jail.
Yeah. That's the only way. There's a big difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance. One's about 10 years in prison.
Yes.
So the way to make sure you do this properly is seeking professional help. The last thing you want to be is another YouTube sensation when it's kind of like a DIY divorce. It's kind of like trying to build your own deck. When you see all those people fall through the deck, that's because people tried to build their own deck, and that same mistakes and bad mistakes can happen when you try to do your own divorce and make those tough decisions alone.
So just to recap that, so basically through utilizing the 72, what was it?
2C.
That's what I said. 72T2C. That's what I said. It's
a mouthful.
So by utilizing that, you're saying that you can take out without being penalized your distributions from your 401k or your retirement accounts. And that's the reason that you're advocating that is to help basically with what we talked about earlier, which was creating the pre-planning or the pre-spending plan and the post-spending plan.
Yes.
To make sure that you don't want to take everything out because obviously that's going to be a taxable event, so you're going to have a massive distribution on your income if you take all of your retirement account out. But you're talking about being able to take out some so that if you do need a little bit extra, so that cushion, so that if you're unable to get your spending under control before you run out, obviously you want to make sure
bridge the gap.
You can bridge that gap so that you can make that transition into effective planning and spending.
And that's the power of the 72T2C tax code.
So I know we've been talking about taxes, and we've been talking about retirement accounts. So one of the main things that we never talk about, which is a silent tax, is inflation. So how does inflation affect my divorce settlement, and how do I plan for that?
So many people just don't see it. They don't see the effects of inflation, but we do feel the effects of inflation. And so you have to keep that in mind when you're going to a settlement offer and analyzing it, saying, will this asset appreciate or depreciate over time? Because your dollar is not becoming more valuable over time. People say, well, I'm just going to bury my money in the sand. Well, if you do that, when you bring it back up 10 years later, those dollars will still be dollars, but they may not be as powerful as they once were. And so
basically you're talking about purchasing power with that, correct?
I am. Purchasing power. So that's why we call it the silent tax, because it It's slowly taking out money out of your pocket without you seeing it. And so one of the ways we educate our clients is talking about the rule of 72. With the rule of 72, what this shares with families is if you're looking at your income today, let's say you're living on $4,000 a month. Well, how much will it take you to live in, let's say, 18 years? Well, one of the ways to do that is look at the inflation period, which is averaging 3 or 4%, and then divide 72 by the average inflation, which is 3 to 4%. So if you divide that by 4, that's 18 years. So in 18 years, if you're living on $4,000, it will double in 18 years. So you'll need $8,000 of income to have the same standard of living.
That can be extremely intimidating.
It is. And so that's why it's imperative that you make the right financial decisions when you're going into your divorce, that you pick the right assets. You don't pick, well, I really love my car, and he can have the money market and he can have the 401k. So that would be a mistake.
So what happens if, we always talk about planning for what we can do and what things that we can avoid. So what do I do when it comes to my spouse or my ex-spouse? If, say for instance, if I'm relying on their, in the settlement, their alimony payments or child support payments, what if they become terminally ill or, they pass away and those things disappear? Obviously, they're not going to continue if they're gone. So how do I plan for that? And what are the things that I can do?
Yeah, we never would wish ill on our ex-spouse, right?
Well, I don't know. I knew a couple of people that
probably would.
Probably would.
But unfortunately, sometimes it comes true. And so when you're relying on child support and college tuition from that other spouse and they predecease you, then you want to make sure that you didn't make this 7 fatal flaw, which is failure to adequately insure the divorce settlement. Life insurance and disability insurance are sometimes a key component to making sure those incomes, even post-death, continue to get paid. So we talked about a lot of pitfalls of divorce. So if you're just tuning into What Your Money Would Say, I just want to wrap up before we go to the next 5 keys to thriving after divorce after a quick commercial break. The first one is failure to cut emotional ties with divorce and negotiation. You definitely don't want to bring your emotion in to picking what assets to keep and what assets not to. Second, not having a pre and post spending plan. How are you going to spend your money before and after your divorce? Third, like Scott told you, it's imperative to not forget to update your estate planning documents and beneficiaries. 4, there's some very crucial tax impacts to your divorce. How do you file going forward? How is the net effect of your investments going to affect your retirement? And third, what can you deduct at divorce time, at tax time of your divorce expenses? 5th is disregarding the IRS code 72T2C, which allows you to take distributions pre-59.5 from a 401k. 6 is forgetting about inflation, that silent tax that affects your bottom line. And then 7 is a failure to adequately insure against death or dismemberment of a spouse. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to What Your Money Would Say. I'm your host, Andrew McNair.
And I'm your co-host, Scott Malleck.
And we're talking about dealing with divorce. We went over 7 financial pitfalls that can really affect your retirement and your lifestyle after retirement. But we want to talk about what keys to help you not just survive after divorce, but finally thrive after divorce. And so that's why we're going to start us off with number 1, Scott.
So we also want to remind you that this is a live show and that if you want to give us a call, ask a question, it's 478-3116. Again, if you want to call, it's 478-3116. Or if you don't feel comfortable calling live on the air, you can either give Andrew's office a call at
380-9558. That's 380-9558, and she can schedule you a free consultation with me, a certified divorce financial analyst, to help you go through these tough financial decisions at divorce.
And as we mentioned, if you need updating estate planning documents, I do offer a free consultation. If you want to give my office a call at 403-0351. Again, that's 403-0351. We'd be glad to schedule you an appointment and review your estate planning documents as well. So, as Andrew mentioned, we're going to be talking about how to thrive rather than just survive. So, what are some of the first steps a recently divorced person should take in order to be successful?
I think the first step is knowing what you have, Scott. Oftentimes we marry opposites, right? So
my wife would tell me that we are completely opposite.
And so that's normal and that's great because opposites attract. But the problem lies in that we split roles typically because we have opposite personalities. So typically we find that one side of the family is handling the checkbook and the other one's spending it. And so
I know how that is.
Yes, we all know how that is. So when it comes to knowing what you have, is when you're thrown into being a single individual again, you have to learn how to juggle. And that's not an easy skill to learn because you have to juggle all the financial decisions you have to make in life. And so the first step is knowing where you are. It's kind of like a map where you say, you are here. And so unless you know where you are, how can you navigate? And so we don't just say, hey, here's a blank sheet and write down a list of your assets so we can help you do a financial affidavit for your divorce. No, what we do is we give you the tools to equip you so that you can find out what retirement assets you have. Do you have any debts and liabilities that you know about or don't know about? What about liquid assets? How are you going to hold yourself over during this transition? Real estate. Do you have property in different states? That can be definitely important. Pay stubs and pension estimates. You'd be so surprised, Scott, how many times we find different fringe benefits and employee benefits that families didn't know about, or different things were coming out of their spouse's pay stub just because they never looked. And so now that they know, they can bring this up to their attorney that we discovered that, hey, he gets a golf membership, which is $500 a month. What about that? Personal property, life insurance, business interests. There's a lot to knowing what your financial situation is, but we equip you.
So I know you mentioned a lot of different things to know about and records to try to locate and assets to try to locate, but are there any other tips that you have for families in order to figure out exactly what they have and exactly what types of assets they have?
Certainly. Knowing what you have doesn't stop at just saying, hey, I have a list, now I know. I think you have to be proactive. And one of the first steps is make a copy of your records. As we're going through the discovery process for families trying to get the best equitable and fair settlement, we want to have all the data available. So I encourage families, buy a safe, get a security deposit box at the bank so you can store these very pertinent information and it doesn't go missing, we like to say, when the time comes where you need to make a case that you deserve a percentage of it.
So, I know we talked about, copying records and going forward. With regards to like an emergency fund, we talked about some of the pitfalls and the distributions that you can take and the planning that you can take. What's the purpose of setting up an emergency fund?
I think you do need a private emergency fund because when you're bridging that gap to becoming single, a lot of times we haven't got a job yet. Maybe we've been a stay-at-home mom or dad and we don't have a job. So we need some assets to hold us over. Now, am I saying empty some joint bank accounts? Absolutely not. That will be big no-nos going through the divorce. But, putting a little bit aside that you get normally instead of spending it, starting to hoard a little bit of cash to a separate bank would be a great idea. Another great tip, Scott, while I'm thinking about it, is forwarding your mail elsewhere.
Well, you mean that my ex-spouse shouldn't have access to all my mail and all my attorney communications?
Yeah, the attorney-client privilege is only as really privileged and private as long as they're not reading your mail. And so one of the ways to do that is having some of this important financial and divorce-related mail be forwarded to a rented mailbox, maybe a trusted friend, or your business address if you have your own business. And that can keep, these really big disagreements of saying, I had this account, or this mail, and it disappeared. So you don't want that to ever be the case. The next one is talking about bridging the gap. Is have you contemplated your career plans? A lot of families haven't worked for 10 to 15 years. Now, I want to empower you and encourage you that just because you're older in age and you haven't worked in 10 to 15 years doesn't make you useless. You probably have a lot of life experience that you can bring to the table. And so always contemplate your career plans.
I know it's also important because from the family law that I do know and that I have dealt with is that can also come into play in divorce settlements, because there are parts of the divorce settlement that help, with alimony that are for, educational purposes and making sure that you can get back into the career force.
Or just given time, and this is talking about rehabilitative maintenance, asking your spouse, hey, I want to go back to school. And, will you pay for that time where I'm going back to school so I can start my career plan over?
He called it something different. I call it rehabilitative alimony. And
there you go.
That's
couple word maintenance.
The lawyers
alimony.
We call it.
Yes. And then so the next one is check your credit score. You want to make sure that there's not debts or credits cards out there that you don't know about. The last thing you want to do is walk away from a divorce thinking that you've washed your hands of all this debt and it's not been split properly. So that's knowing what you have is so powerful. Before we go into the next key to thriving after divorce, we're going to take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back.
Today's financial landscape can be rough. One of the most important aspects of planning is choosing the right guide to help you navigate the road to retirement. Andrew McNair and the team at SWAN Capital is dedicated to providing the very best service in the retirement planning industry today. SWAN Capital is a full-service independent wealth management firm dedicated to providing guaranteed custom income plans that you cannot outlive. Contact Andrew McNair at SWAN Capital 850-380-9558. That's 850-380-9558. The difference between SWAN Capital and you retire once. We help people retire every day. You should be enjoying your retirement years, not letting worry keep you up at night. SWAN Capital. Sleep well at night. Contact Andrew McNair at SWAN Capital 850-380-9558. That's 850-380-9558. Again, that's 850-380-9558.
The Veteran Benefit Project, founded by Andrew McNair, president of SWAN Capital, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping veterans and widows of veterans with long-term care expenses by qualifying for the VA's Aid and Attendance Benefit. Learn how to receive over $24,000 per year from the VA towards long-term health care. There is absolutely no fee associated with our assistance to the veteran, the widow of a veteran, their families, or any retirement community. Our goal is to preserve the dignity of the veteran and to reduce the dependency on the Medicaid system. Again, learn how to receive over $24,000 per year from the VA. Contact the Veteran Benefit Project 850-380-5137. That's 850-380-5137. 850-380-5137. Look us up on the web, myveteranbenefit.com. At the Veteran Benefit Project, we are committed to helping you secure the benefits you deserve.
Welcome back to What Your Money Would Say. I'm your host, Andrew McNair.
And I'm your co-host, Scott Malleck.
And we're dealing with divorce, and we're talking about the 5 major pitfalls of divorce.
Actually, we're talking about the 5 ways to succeed. We talked about previously the 7 pitfalls of divorce, but right now we're talking about, not to cut you off, Andrew. These are the ways that you thrive after divorce.
And so let's move on to the number 2.
So we talked about, previously the first steps to take. So what are, you talked about a big picture approach in your paper about, how to approach divorce and divorce settlements. So what do you mean when you take, there's a big picture approach?
I think we've been conditioned as a society to think, because, soap operas and movies, that there's only one way to go through divorce.
And I have to tell clients that, they come in and they think that I'm a miracle worker, and because they've seen Perry Mason or Matlock or these
Law and Order,
they see these television.
You can't
shows.
handle the truth.
Exactly, and I have to explain to them that the reality is that attorneys are not like you see in the theater,
right,
and are on the television screen. And it's the same way with divorce. Is there's multiple
other
different
approaches,
avenues to do it.
And I think families need to know about the three basic approaches. The first one is collaborative divorce. The second is the litigated divorce, which is like what you see in the movies, very adversarial. And then the third is the mediated divorce. And so I'll start with the collaborative divorce because that's one of the divorce types and approaches that many families are not as familiar with, because it is a fast-growing, emerging way to handle divorce. And why it's so new and fast-growing is because of its results. Instead of a litigated divorce taking 17 months, some are ending as less than 17 weeks, which is just incredible.
That is extremely expedited. I mean, most court proceedings I know don't take less than 17 weeks. So
right.
That's definitely an expedited process, and it can be extremely beneficial when you're trying to just resolve the matter and move forward with your own life.
And it saves families emotional and financial turmoil of having to pay either emotionally for this or financially for a elongated divorce.
And as the child of divorce, I can give you an example. I mean, the next one you're talking about is a litigated divorce, and that's exactly what my parents went through, and it was 3.5 years worth of drawn out litigation. They fought over every single thing down to the rug in front of the fireplace.
And the sad reality is there are other approaches like collaborative divorce, which puts people, instead of being on opposite sides of the table, they put it at the same side of the table. And why it's so popular and fast-growing is because now, instead of you hire your attorney, you hire my attorney, you do that, but it's under the agreement that if either of the clients say we're going to go litigation, we're not going to work this out together, that you have to start all over again with different professionals. And that frightens a lot of clients from saying, hey, well, we're going to have to make this work because I don't want to go to court after we've done all this work.
And I mean, I could tell you, I know divorce attorneys back when my parents got divorced in the 1990s were not cheap, and
right.
They haven't gotten cheaper.
No.
So, if you have to go through a whole process and then start over from square one, you're looking at what can become extremely expensive.
And another reason I think collaborative divorces are so successful is it's about the team approach. Not only is it my family law professional and my divorce attorney, it's hiring a therapist. It's hiring a certified divorce financial analyst and bringing the team alongside each couple, each individual, and bring it together so that this couple can make the right decisions and come to a fair and equitable settlement. So the next one, like Scott was telling you, is the litigated divorce. This is where when we go to court, families kind of become very adversarial. They put their gloves on and they just go at it.
And not to interrupt, but the reality is that the courtroom is an adversarial place by its nature. And so, even if you aren't intending to be adversarial, you morph into an adversarial, platform. And so it becomes very adversarial. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, but even if you're not intending to be combative or adversarial, because of the way the courtroom is designed, it transforms into that,
yeah.
Which is it can be devastating to families to have to go through something.
Which translates to lengthy and costly. And so
extremely emotionally taxing.
Because it's so confrontational. And that is one option. We help families as a CDFA, a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, in any of these approaches. I'm not biased towards anyone because each one is right for a certain situation or certain individuals. But we can offer expert testimony. So it's nice when I can come to the table for my clients and say, hey, this is why this pension evaluation makes sense. This is why this settlement offer will protect this individual over their lifetime, or it's not fair. And so that's why we can provide some really valuable expert testimony. And then the last one is the mediated divorce. This is also a really great approach because not going to court and involving a mediator means that we're trying to meet on neutral ground first off. We've agreed that we don't want to fight it out, but that we want to hire a mediator, someone that sits as a neutral party that doesn't speak up for one individual over the other, but just offers some insight on how the state of Florida looks at divorce and gives them that neutral perspective.
And mediation is actually beginning to trend in all areas of the law because the courtroom can be so costly. And we, attorneys, we really like to avoid litigation at all costs, and that's why you see 90% of cases settle. And it's because, and that's why mediation is starting to trend. It's because, and our requirements and contracts and arbitration or mediation is a prerequisite before trial, because resolving it prior to going to court is typically a better route to take.
Sure. Now, every approach has its pros and cons. The thing about mediation you have to understand is if you don't have any professionals representing you and you're just relying on the mediator, that can be a problem because the mediator can't take your side or her side or vice versa. They can only just give the law in its.
Obviously, I'm an attorney. Andrew's a CDFA, a financial advisor, and there is benefit in recommending this, but I would never recommend that you go into one of these alone.
Absolutely,
you should
not.
always have an advisor because they understand. They do it day in and day out, and they understand exactly what aspects they need to focus on and what things they need to be looking for. So you should always have an advisor.
Yeah, I mean, you do this hopefully once in a lifetime, and these individuals, professionals like myself, and family law professionals do it every day, 4 times a day. So it's very critical that you hire the right professionals and build the right team.
So what do you do in a situation regarding verification of spousal disclosures?
So what you're assuming is not every individual is very truthful with their ex-spouse.
Well, I know that I mean, like I said, from my own personal experience, that it can become very ticky-tacky, very they get one side versus the other, and
the truth becomes blurred.
Exactly. And so, when you have to request that your spouse discloses something, or especially when you're dealing with finances, what do we do when you ask, hey, well, how much do you make? What are the expenditures? What do you do with that regarding those disclosures?
And before we leave that, a lot of families are just shocked by how their spouse starts acting at divorce. And what they say, and it's sad, marriage is about love and divorce is about assets. It's great people start to act their worst in divorces. And it's okay to trust your spouse, but trust but verify. As Ronald Reagan once said, you want to make sure you trust but you verify. And especially when you have a complex financial situation, maybe you have accumulated a lot of assets or a lot of property. Also, what if your spouse is self-employed or a business owner? We hate to think about it, but it's easy as a business owner or self-employed individual to skew the numbers in your favor or hide assets that otherwise employed people could not do.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that coin, you should always be completely transparent with your advisor, with your your CDFA or your family law attorney, because you don't ever want to not disclose something to your spouse.
No, because if you try to hide something, you could not only pay your extra attorney's fees, but theirs too.
Exactly.
And you definitely don't want your divorce being more expensive. So that's why it's imperative of hiring a certified divorce financial analyst when dealing with divorce, because we will help you not only trust but verify. We'll take care of parts of the verify process. Even if we have to hire a forensic accountant and add that to our team, we're going to look at pay stubs, pension estimates, and we're going to track down all those fringe benefits so that you do get the equitable and fair settlement that you deserve.
So earlier in the show, we were talking about pitfalls and emotions regarding divorce. So how do you handle emotions in divorce and make sure that you keep them from affecting your finances?
I think that's one of the greatest values that we bring to the table as a certified divorce financial analyst is I've been dealing with money since I was 14 and a half. I started this helping families deal with finances. I was blessed at 14 and a half to just know what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so over a decade, we've been doing that. And so I think that's one of the strengths that we bring to the table is separating emotion from economics. And it's okay to be emotional. It's okay to grieve, but it is not okay to let your emotions go wild. And there's 4 basic emotions families need to know to compartmentalize and keep in check. The first one, Scott, is revenge.
You would be surprised at how many people want to get revenge on their ex-spouses, and
they feel betrayed.
Of course,
and that's natural.
I'm just that's what I'm saying. It's not unnatural, and that's what I'm trying to convey is that
I trusted you till death do us part, and you ran off and did some nice things.
I mean, and even if they're the ones that left, typically there's still animosity and revenge feelings that bubble up to the surface. So, it's definitely making sure that you stay on, like you said, on the right side of the fence, because you don't want to, hide assets or to do things that we kind of mentioned before that you think could be, oh, I'm getting back at them, or they're not going to know, because that can only make things worse for you.
Like your grandma said, never stoop to their level.
Exactly.
And that's what you don't want to do. The second is guilt. Poor me. Feel like I brought this on, that, the reason that this is all going is because of me. So don't let guilt interfere with what percentage that you are trying to come to the table with at a settlement offer, because you worked hard allowing them to work hard if you stayed at home. Or if you both earned an income, then you both have a lot of economic value that you brought to the table.
And I'm glad you kind of mentioned that, but because guilt and fear kind of go, hand in hand, especially with, like you said about stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home dad. Just because you were a stay-at-home mom, the courts account for that, and the time that you helped build, you supported your spouse in building their business or their career. The courts taken that into account. So you need to understand that your time is valuable too, and not to be afraid.
And don't let a spouse, and that's the third emotion is fear. Don't let your spouse threaten you. Power and money sometimes feel like they're intertwined, but it's not the case. As a certified divorce financial analyst, I'm going to be your advocate. I'm going to fight for you and put the gloves on if I have to tell people that you are entitled to certain percentages because of what you brought to the table over those years of marriage. And then the last one is despair. It's easy to say, this is too overwhelming, we're not going to be able to get through it. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, and concentrate your energy on problem solving. So again, these emotions are natural. It's understandable to grieve, but don't let your emotions run wild.
So to wrap up, what does it take to become financially savvy and financially independent again?
I think it's knowing what you have and then keeping in mind these critical factors. The first critical factor is taxes. These small tax implications of decisions of what asset to pick and what tax status it is, or what tax status to file under, seem small, but they make massive. It's like small hinges swing big doors.
Yes.
So you definitely want to open the right door and make sure you make the right decisions.
So
the next one is purchases. Scott, it's easy to say, well, now I'm independent. Now I need to go find another home to buy, or I need to buy a new car. Or, I'm going to buy this really nice, roadster so I can attract some other people. And that would be a bad mistake. So you want to make sure your purchases stay small. The next one is future planning. Start with the end in mind. What do you want your future lifestyle to look like post-divorce? You'd be surprised how many families just don't think about what is the perfect way after this divorce, perfect lifestyle I want after.
And that goes back to one of the pitfalls we talked about earlier with the pre and post spending plan, is making sure that you understand what you want and how you want to move forward.
And setting priorities.
Exactly.
And then the last one is updating, which is what Scott Malleck specializes in, which is updating your beneficiaries, making sure your IRAs, life insurance beneficiaries are updated, as well as your estate planning documents.
Exactly, because like I said, even though the state of Florida does provide adequate protection for ex-spouses, you don't want to leave it up to chance. You don't want to make sure that you don't want to chance it that those protections are going to kick in. You want your will, your power of attorney, your living will, any trust, any legal documents that you have, whether it's life insurance policies, etc., are reflecting the current situation that you're in.
Right. And so over the last hour, we've talked about some really important 7 financial pitfalls that families should make sure they avoid. And the first one is failure to cut emotional ties. Scott, we talked about how families sometimes intertwine emotions with economics. The second is not having a pre and post spending plan, making sure that you know how much money you're coming in and going out right now, as well as what is it going to be like when I'm divorced? Am I going to have less expenses, or am I going to have more? The third is definitely forgetting those old estate planning documents, not seeing an elder attorney like Scott Malleck to update your documents. 4, forgetting tax implications of your divorce. How many expenses can I write off at tax time? How am I going to file in the future? And which assets should I pick based on taxes? Number 5, forgetting about IRS codes like 72T2C that allow you to take distributions pre-59.5 on 401ks. 6, forgetting about inflation, Scott, that silent attacks that can slowly take money out of your pocket. 7, failure to adequately ensure your divorce settlement, making sure that, God forbid, if your ex-spouse gets terminally ill or passes away, that your income, college tuition, or maintenance doesn't stop with it. And then we talked about the 5 keys to thriving after divorce too, Scott.
Yeah, and so basically one of the most important things is to make sure you know what you have.
Right.
And you know, your retirement assets, their debt, liabilities, liquid assets, real estate, pay stubs.
There's a lot that goes into
Exactly.
it. And hiring a certified divorce financial analyst, we equip you with the tools to find out what that involves. The second is taking a big picture approach. There's not one way to divorce: collaborative, litigated, and mediated. Third, trust but verify. Make sure that just because you're trusting your spouse, make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to and providing you all the information. Fourth, separating emotions from economics. And lastly, becoming financially savvy. And I hope over the last hour we've taught you a few things to look out for going through a divorce, but you can't do it all in 1 hour. So call us at 850-380-9558. That's 850-380-9558, so you can sleep well at night after your divorce. See you next time on What Your Money Would Say.
While we believe the information in this report is reliable, we cannot guarantee its accuracy. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and are not intended as investment advice or a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. Please consult your financial professional before making any investment decision.